Some games can be life-changing. Some games are god-awful. And some games are just fine. And that's okay, because not every game can be a masterpiece. And not every game has to be a masterpiece for you to enjoy them. And that's where Spelldrifter comes into the equation. The turn-based deck-building game that's free on Epic this week is no Divinity Original Sin 2. But what it does offer is mediocrity. And while that sounds like a bad thing, I mean, it kinda is a bad thing. What my point is that through its mediocrity, Spelldrifter is actually quite endearing. It's hard to explain. Despite almost every single aspect of the game needing improvement, I always look forward to playing it more. It's actually quite charming because of its flaws. And because it does just enough right, I think that the Spelldrifter experience is worth you checking out. Here's my review explaining more. Stay tuned. Spelldrifter describes itself as a hybrid tactical RPG and deck building game that features the best parts of both. I'm not so sure how true the RPG description is here, so let me explain the gameplay to you and let you decide. Beyond the tutorial prologue, you start each battle with a choice of 3 heroes. There are 4 classes to choose from, and if you unlock additional characters, you will eventually have at least a choice of 2 characters per class. The choices within classes are meaningful too. A warrior might be tanky, damage dealing, or a balance between the two. But again, you can only pick 3 heroes per battle, so in the second map, you might have a pool of 9 heroes to pick 3 from. Now each hero has access to a deck of cards for you to curate and use in battle. Annoyingly, you can't save multiple deck selections, so it's quite inconvenient to switch out between different builds on the fly. You'll likely be adjusting a lot before each battle, or when you earn a new card. In the battles themselves, you'll all take turns to move and use cards. Each card will take a certain amount of ticks, and this will determine when your next turn will be. Simple enough, right? Now I'm not sure deck building really counts as an RPG. You're not going to be making any choices in the story or anything. But what deck building does give you is the flexibility to use your character in different ways. Now after each battle, whether you win or lose, your characters will gain XP. Gain enough XP and you'll level up. And by leveling up, you'll often unlock a new card and more importantly, increase the amount of artifacts you can equip. Artifacts are passive buffs that your character can acquire, and they all have differing artifact slot costs. An artifact that takes up 4 slots is likely to be better than one that only takes up 1 slot. And since your hero's base stats don't change upon level up, this is the most meaningful way to boost your hero. Now there are 4 classes which you'll hopefully already be familiar with. Warfare/warriors, faith-based clerics, mages, and rogues. You'll learn how to use all of them in the very long prologue, and you can skip it if you like, but the prologue does give each character a bit of a backstory, which is nice. Once you arrive on the 3 main maps, which are unlocked consecutively, you'll be moving one space at a time. You'll get a bit of dialogue, or none for some reason, fight a fight, and then move on to the next point. One of the issues I have with the map is that they don't really label the side content properly. In some cases, you'll be able to travel onto differing branches, and Spelldrifter won't tell you clearly which ones are for the main story and which ones are essentially skippable. That's not a massive issue for me because I always do the side content anyway, but it would be handy to know ahead of time. In each battle, you'll be facing the same variety of enemies as your heroes. They're dependent on what's going on in the story, and they're interesting enough. But I basically just boiled them down to warriors with armor, warriors without armor, mages, and ranged enemies. Oh, and buildings. Other than that, they're just a different shape. Now when you first enter a fight, you'll have no idea on the type of enemies you'll be facing, or whether your choice of 3 heroes is a good fit. So the first round is always just a bit of recon. If you can't beat it, at least you'll get some XP. But then you can adjust to use the heroes who'll do a better job. If you face a bunch of squishy enemies with high attack, then your tank might not be up to the job, but a mage who's got some AoE attacks might be. And that's a real criticism of the game, because most of the time, it's not so much the tactics used within each battle which will make you win the fight, but rather your choices of hero before the fight even begins. And I think this is highlighted further by the fact that there are no difficulty settings. In-game tactics are just not as relevant as they could be. And this is a shame because there are some real depth to the cards available to you. Now this is countered by the fact that you don't lose anything per encounter. In fact, you still gain through experience points. But if you had a preview of what to expect before you entered into each fight, Spelldrifter could probably have gotten away with including some more risk-based gameplay and consequences for failure. As it stands though, I think this has to go down as a lack of balance, or a lack of foresight. And what's the point of having a choice of heroes, and a wide choice of cards, if the fact of the matter is that there's only one way to beat a fight? That isn't flexibility or tactical, that isn't role-playing, that's solving a puzzle. Solving a puzzle before the fight even begins. And to give you a technical example, and of one that I mentioned earlier, let's say you were up against a lot of enemies, and you wanted to draw them to your tank. There just aren't enough cards to boost armor, and the ticks required to use countering moves is too high. So if you do manage to taunt all those enemies, your tank will not be equipped to survive the onslaught, leaving you a hero down and most of the enemies still around. That means a tank, for this particular map, is not a viable hero, and you'll be forced to go down the route of killing as many enemies as possible, as quickly as possible. The developers of Spelldrifter needed to shift their perspective away from heroes, and more towards the variety of cards that would allow you to find a way to beat each battle in different ways. Because there is such an emphasis on hero selection, you do find extra heroes during your time with the story. Starting with 5 at the end of the prologue, you can have about 7 by the end of the first map, and 9 midway through the second map. What's annoying though, is that every time you get a new hero, they start at level 1, making them out of place with your more experienced regulars. While stats don't boost with level, so you can use these new heroes immediately, they do come at a disadvantage because of their lack of artifact slots and limited card selection. You can replay older levels to get them up to speed, but you'll only be farming XP as old battles don't give you any further rewards. I think this aspect really needs to be improved upon. I literally had a hero at the level cap of 15 when I met a new hero. It's just a bit jarring to see the differences. Now the controls and camera for each fight is fine. You don't normally have to move or rotate the camera too much, but it does help from time to time. I found the movement of characters a bit clunky, where you drag them from one spot to another on the map, rather than just clicking, but as this is a ported mobile game, this does kind of make sense. I thought the AI was fine too, not overly easy or difficult, but then again, a difficulty slider might have been a nice touch. All in all, the gameplay was enjoyable enough. Figuring out the ways to beat each fight, building out each hero's deck, and learning how all the heroes synergize together was satisfying. But there is just too much emphasis placed on which heroes to use, rather than how you could adapt each hero to each battle, making card selection, balancing characters, and the in-game tactics less relevant than they should be. The gameplay ended up being mediocre. Spelldrifter's story is interesting enough. A meteor has shattered the barrier between the spirit world and the mortal world, which introduces magic into the world, and the world is reacting to such a life-changing development. I think this is a solid premise, and there's a bunch of potential here to build out the world. With cults, institutions, and politics, it can make for a really immersive setting. The problem is though, they haven't built it out at all. Things don't make too much sense or are often unexplained. Even how some of the first characters meet is left unexplained, which feels a bit lazy, and it's easily fixable. And that's another problem with Spelldrifter. The telling of the story as a whole always feels a bit lazy, forced, or flat. The dialogue is decent, but there is just no emotion whatsoever. I remember there being a potential for quite a tragic story plotline in the second map, and it was over in seconds. Nothing, honestly, it felt like such a missed opportunity. And it could be that because there's no voice acting except during the cutscenes, it's all just writing, that they've lost some emotion in the words, and they've lost some bite to the story. But I don't think so, because dialogue can feel solid at times, with humour and charm. I just can't escape from the fact that this all feels a bit rushed, which is weird because the game itself actually feels really long. Now it could feel long because of the rather long tutorial prologue, but the side content and the amount of battles per map means that you'll be playing for quite a while, which makes it good value for money. But because the content can be so hit and miss, I get the feeling that they went for quantity over quality, another sign that the game was rushed. I would have preferred a shorter, more filled out story and world, and it's a real shame because there is so much potential here. But all in all, not a terrible story, it just could have been a lot better. The audio in Spelldrifter is quite frankly all over the place. You've got these somewhat out of place guitar riffs for whenever you win or get a new chest. And it's the same one for every chest, over and over and over again. Only to get this really relaxing piece in the map and dialogue. And that's when you're talking to a demon or something. Again, out of place. The in-battle music and audio is pretty good though and immersive, though there is a limited selection. One thing I do like is when you get a card or level up. You get this sort of drum, cymbal crashing sound, which really does feel like you've achieved something. The art used in dialogue and on cards is mostly good as well, though its quality is inconsistent. I mean, look at Corgan's picture for dialogue compared to his card. One looks like it's from a children's book, and the other is better suited for the overall art direction of the game. Now this might be related to the game's development, which I'll touch upon later, but this inconsistency can be quite jarring. The graphics in the battles look good though, as well as on the map and in the cutscenes, which is good news because this is where you'll be spending most of your time. Overall, Spelldrifter's art and music is a mixed bag, but they're good enough to enjoy the game and are not too off-putting. My review of Spelldrifter has been based on playing it as a free game that I had never heard of, but I imagine that the 1,365 backers on Kickstarter may feel differently. A Kickstarter for the game Labyrinth was launched in 2015, with the devs asking for 150 grand. They reached their initial goal in less than a month. But look at this description. This is not the game I played. They removed this hero too and made them an enemy. Now I don't know what happened in the preceding 4 years, but by 2019, I believe the name Labyrinth had been dropped, and the newly named Spelldrifter was an Apple Arcade exclusive. I don't think this was ever intended to be a platform exclusive, or how much of this change was communicated to the backers, or if the backers got their money back, or if the backers got anything that they were promised. But looking at the comments on Kickstarter, and the fact that this is now a very different game without in-game purchases, I somehow doubt that. It was only available on Epic Games from April 2021, and on Steam from February 2022, with a price tag of £16. This whole saga seems far from ideal. I didn't let it influence my review, but I thought it best that you know for full transparency. I'll let you form your own opinions about it all. I really liked Spelldrifter, which was a surprise. It could have been a much better game than it ultimately was, and this makes it a mediocre experience. But for some reason, this mediocrity removes some of the pressure from playing the game. It's a really strange and funny thing to try and explain, but I felt rather reassured and comforted by its mediocrity. I could enjoy the game for what it was. And it does have some solid gameplay and a decent enough story, and the game is enjoyable. But sadly, Spelldrifter is a missed opportunity to make a better game. Having said all that, I can definitely say it's a saving of about £12, which was the cheapest CD key price I can find online. I can just about recommend getting the game at that price too, but I'd still wait for a discount. I think about £5 is a fair price. And with that, I'm afraid it's time to say goodbye. I'd love to hear what you have to think about Spelldrifter, so please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. If you liked the video, please give it a like. If you didn't, by all means give it a thumbs down. If you'd like to watch more reviews like this, please consider subscribing to a Nomad in Gameland. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.